What's going on, everybody? Welcome in to Main Slate Matchups here. Wednesday night, we're going to be talking through the Thursday night football game and then the entire main slate, looking at our favorite matchups, both for DFS purposes and for underdog purposes, pick six, prize picks, whatever your favorite pick'em game is. And you know what? If you like just betting on sports books and just want to do props and you don't give a damn about DFS, this is still going to be really helpful for you. I think my favorite kind of feedback on the show so far has been that it's helping people in a number of ways, but maybe most importantly, it's helping people learn how to use the really unique data and tools that we have here at FTN, including, of course, StatsHub, which I already have up on the screen. So what we're going to do here tonight is we are going to go game by game and just kind of point to the best matchups. I can tell you I've gotten through like 6 of the games doing my full research. The others I haven't been able to get to yet. So some of these are going to be really easy. I can just kind of go quickly through exactly what I think the most important matchups are, why I like the guys I like, and the rest we'll kind of have to either do together or do by request. If you are watching on Twitter, you can see the link is in the description of that tweet. So you can head over to the YouTube show and contribute to those live comments in the YouTube chat. And I will answer any questions. I will look at any matchups that you guys want me to look through while you're there. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the FTN channel. And before we get started, a big shout out to Vlad Sedler. His fantasy baseball product here at FTN Fantasy is the absolute best that there is. And believe it or not, December 11th here right now, it's already fantasy baseball season. So make sure you are giving that a try. Go check out all of the fantasy baseball product. There's a reason why it was immensely popular last year, and Vlad returning the entire fantasy baseball team this season. So it's going to be just as good, if not even better, this year. I know we have some really cool stuff planned for those fantasy baseball projections kind of throughout the season, but then just a ton of preseason baseball content. So reminder to check that out. And now let's dive in. And really good game tomorrow night for Thursday Night Football. Rams and Niners, a very important divisional game, very important just kind of playoff picture game, but also a very fun game for DFS and pick'em purposes. So let's jump in. One thing that I love doing at this time of year is continuing to look at the season-long data, but then also kind of noticing trends, right? At this time of season, not only do we know these teams well, but teams know themselves really well. And so if a team struggled for the first 10 weeks of the season in one specific area, yeah, we are aware of that, but guess what? So are they. And so a lot of the time we will see teams address those issues. I think a really good example, San Francisco, throughout most of the beginning of the season, we're getting kind of shredded by slot receivers, getting shredded over the middle, shredded by slot receivers as a whole. They are still allowing a decent amount of yards per out run from the slot, but the overall production from the slot way down, 31st in the league over the last 5 games. So second best at defending, or I should say they've allowed the second fewest yards to opposing slot receivers in the last 5 weeks. So we will also look at a lot of just like last 5 weeks data here. So first thing with this San Francisco and LA game, we have LA playing a lot more too high over the last 5 weeks. They're near the top of the league in too high. Guess what? That is going to be George Kittle's music. So let's go ahead and just take a look at the San Francisco numbers against too high. So what we'll do here is we'll go to San Francisco and we will see on the year 2.9 yards per out run for Juwan Jennings, 2.6 for George Kittle. When we then add the filter of just too high coverages, we will see that Juwan Jennings goes down a little bit, but only to 2.5, but George Kittle goes all the way up to 2.9 yards per out run. The other major thing here for George Kittle, he has been phenomenal this season whenever Christian McCaffrey is out, and that's not a coincidence. George Kittle has always been a fantastic receiver, a big-time playmaker in the passing game. The question has always been usage and intent of actually getting him the ball. Deebo Samuel, not the same guy that he's been over the last few years. We were joking earlier on the Daily Dime, like we don't know if he's just struggling. There have been some rumors like, hey, maybe he's just struggling to get himself into normal playing shape because he had pneumonia earlier this season. Maybe he's just a little bit fat and slow now. Who the heck knows what exactly is going on with him? But we've seen fewer and fewer design plays. Until last week, he had gone 3 consecutive weeks without even a carry. That tells you what Mike Shanahan thinks, or what Kyle Shanahan thinks of Deebo Samuel nowadays. So we also saw a lot more design stuff to George Kittle. That is all fantastic, coming off a monstrous game. And now I think he's going to be in for another big one here against LA. So very first thing, I've already given out a bunch of picks with George Kittle so far, but over 57.5 receiving yards, I think, is an absolute slam dunk over an underdog. And I'm going to even try to get some plays out tonight or tomorrow morning for the entire week where I'm including this pick here on George Kittle. I think this should be a 65 minimum for his actual receiving total. So 57.5, I think, is a fantastic start to the week. Also a decent spot here for Juwan Jennings, just because he is so clearly the wide receiver one to George Kittle's, tight end one. But you can kind of call them the wide receiver 1 and 2 right now for this Niners passing offense. And then San Francisco, on the other hand, playing a lot more zone. And this is an interesting one because San Francisco knows LA quite well. They know Matt Stafford quite well. So they probably know that Stafford has been outstanding against zone this season. Puka Nacua has been outstanding against zone. However, the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data points us here to Cooper Kupp, as against San Francisco, wide receiver 1s are producing 17% less than they usually do. Tight ends are negative 20%. Wide receiver 3s are negative 8%. And then wide receiver 2s, that Cooper Kupp role, neutral so far. So on the underdog side here, we do have Cooper Kupp up to 63.5 now. He was 62.5 earlier in the day. I still think this is low, but it's not a phenomenal play. So I'm not locking anything in here just yet. If we do get word that, actually, let me check here. We might already have it. That Tutu Atwell is going to be starting this one due to Demarcus Robinson injury. Let's see. Oops, I'm in the wrong contest here. I would have a lot of interest in Tutu Atwell, and I'd have a lot of interest in Tutu Atwell, not necessarily because anything in the matchup stands out, though he has been good against zone coverage. He has just been good, period. It's kind of that, though. He's just been good, period. When he's on the field, when he's running routes, he is producing. Now, there is some kind of asterisk that we have to put next to that, because some of the time that he got snaps this year, at least when he was like a starter, it was when both Kupp and Nacua were out. So Demarcus Robinson still listed questionable with that shoulder injury. Not entirely sure what we're going to see there, but if we do get Tutu Atwell in that starting role, I will have interest, particularly if his lines are low, because the guy produces when he's on the field. Next game, we have Miami-Houston. This is one that really intrigues me from a DFS perspective. The main reason it's intriguing from a DFS perspective is because Miami, as long as Raheem Mostert is out, but honestly, it probably doesn't matter a ton, Miami has become super pass happy, one of the highest pass rates over expectation around the league over the last several weeks, and it just kind of continues to climb. They are trusting Tua. Tua looks healthier than he's been in a while. Tyreek finally putting together some back-to-back good performances. Jalen Waddle looking quite good as well. So I really like Jalen Waddle in this one, actually, and the reason is kind of straightforward here. When we look at this Houston defense, they don't stand out in any matchup way whatsoever. They don't play a ton of single high. They don't play a ton of two high. They don't play a ton of man or zone. They don't blitz a ton. They don't do anything towards the extremes, right? That's something we've talked about in the past. When you're trying to evaluate a matchup for, let's say, a player who does great against man coverage, it doesn't matter if the opponent plays the 13th most or the 17th most zone, or 13th most or 17th most man coverage. It matters if they play the 3rd most or the 27th most. We're looking for those extremes. Houston is not an extreme in any way, but this is kind of extreme here in the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data, plus 26% to opposing wide receiver 2s. I like that. I also like negative 19% to running backs, negative 16% to tight ends. What has been the main reason why Tyreek Hill has underwhelmed this season? Because Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane are getting a million touches and stealing from Tyreek a little bit. So definitely you could have made a ton of money this past week on Tua double stacks with Tyreek and Jalen Waddle with either a Devontae Adams or a Garrett Wilson bring back. Now, that would have been especially true if we didn't have the Minnesota double stack and the Josh Allen and Puka Nacua bring back go completely bonkers. But that game was really strong in large part because there was a ton of passing. And I think this Miami-Houston game could also have a ton of passing. So Waddle Tyreek is double stacks. You can throw Jonnu Smith in there. I know Houston has been very susceptible to the slot, and Jonnu Smith and Tyreek Hill are kind of the two slot guys for this Miami team. So kind of all three of those definitely viable. And then on the Houston side of things, Miami already in the top 10 of the league in both zone rate and too high rate on the season, are playing even more zone and even more too high of late. And when we go over to this Houston team and look at their production against too high, let me get rid of San Francisco here. We see it's really only one guy who's producing. Nico Collins, 3.3 yards per out run against too high. And then against zone coverage, we also see Nico Collins up there. Nico Collins at 3.5 yards per out run on the season. So yeah, in both cases, like it's a slight dip, but separating so much from everybody else on the team. The only other guy on the team who actually has a better yards per out run against zone, or the only guy on the team with a better yards per out run against zone and too high than their baseline is Dalton Schultz. It's only a small boost. So this isn't like, oh, we should run to go play Dalton Schultz, but I'll take a look at his props and I will consider him as not necessarily a bring back to Miami stuff, but if I wanted to double CJ Stroud instead, which has not worked this season, I think this would be a week where it's Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz instead of Nico Collins and Tank Dell. Clearly, by the way, they miss Stephon Diggs in this regard. So something to note there as well. Let's see. A reminder to everybody, as we go along here, anytime you have questions, anytime you have comments, anytime you want me to address specific players, just note that here in the YouTube chat. I will get to those as soon as I can. In the meantime, let's just continue to hum along. Kansas City and Cleveland is up next. And here is where I want to bring up the last 5 weeks and take a look at the passing air yards defense section here and looking at the deep production allowed. Kansas City, 416 yards allowed in the last 5 weeks on deep throws alone. This is a ton of deep production. It has kind of come out of nowhere. This was a very good Kansas City defense for most of the season. They have not been a very good Kansas City defense over the last few weeks. I think part of it is offenses have kind of seemingly realized, hey, you know what? We can just spend all our attention and effort kind of slowing down Chris Jones in the pass rush. And if we can actually do that, there's nobody else making them pay for giving extra attention to Chris Jones, and then they actually have time to get the ball downfield. You have a very aggressive secondary that's kind of used to not having to cover for a long time, and then you get some of those explosive plays. So I don't know if there's a better matchup to take advantage of this or a better quarterback to take advantage of this than Jameis Winston, who all he wants to do is throw the ball downfield. Anyway, Kansas City also playing a lot of man coverage. So very much like this for Elijah Moore and Cedric Tillman. It's yet again a good spot for Jerry Jeudy. All of those guys very much in play. I don't yet have a favorite in the props department. Let's take a look at where those Browns are. I think one answer might just be Jameis Winston over 237.5 passing yards. Certainly have no issue with that whatsoever. Let's see. On the side of their receivers, you have Jeudy at 70.5. Like, I think Judy's the best DFS play, but that 70.5 number has come way up in the last few weeks. We don't have anything yet for Cedric Tillman. Don't know yet if he's going to be playing, but finally returned to practice with that concussion. So I would be surprised if he doesn't play. And do we not have anything up yet for Elijah Moore? That's a little surprising, but maybe did he get hurt and I just didn't notice? Regardless, good spot here for Jameis. It's going to be a spot I have interest in on DraftKings because Jameis continues to be really cheap. And while I personally think that there's absolutely nothing to it, Winston does have a pattern so far of nuking the slate, then doing poorly, then nuking the slate, then doing poorly, and then nuking the slate, and then doing poorly. So if you believe in that kind of thing, then he's due for a good week. I personally do not subscribe to that, but it isn't. I think the main point is you know what you're going to get with Jameis. You're either going to get an underwhelming performance, or because the pass volume is always there, you're going to get a really big performance if the efficiency is there. And in fact, I'll bring up this game log just to show snow game against Pittsburgh, every other game, 41, 46, 46, 58, and 41 pass attempts. In the words of Two Gun, Jameis is going to throw it, and he's going to throw it downfield. So lots of interest here on the DFS side. And like I said, probably interest in just Jameis in terms of his props, but might have some interest. No, Elijah Moore is fully healthy, so I'm not sure why we don't have any props up for him yet, but I will take a longer look through the Cleveland side. On the other hand, Cleveland still first in the league in single high rate, but they are only 10th in single high rate over the last 5 weeks. Now, that still means that we should be looking at who's producing against single high. Cleveland playing more man coverage in that time as well. So who's producing? Kansas City when it comes to man coverage. No surprise, DeAndre Hopkins is the guy once again. He has been really, really efficient on a per route basis. The biggest problem with Hopkins, as we saw, not running a ton of routes. Second in routes run 2 weeks ago, third in routes run this week behind Kelsey, and then this week it was also Xavier Worthy who got ahead of him. But he's still DeAndre Hopkins, and I do think he will be on the field. So if his number is anywhere near as low as it was this past week, I will have interest there once again. And then finally, the other guy that I have a ton of interest in this week, Cleveland, over the last 5 weeks, number one, they're allowing a ton of explosives in the passing game. So I think it's another reason why I like both Hopkins and Worthy to some degree. But man, they have also allowed a ton of explosives on the ground. So in fact, let me bring that up just to show you guys just how much they've been gashed in the running game. So going back to StatsHub, you can see I've got the last 5 weeks filtered here, and we're going to go to that advanced rushing defense tab, scroll to the right, and look at the explosive rushing yards allowed. Certainly Carolina up there, but in only 4 games, 320 explosive rushing yards allowed by this Cleveland team, a 13% explosive rush rate. That is 6 worse. So allowing a lot on the ground, and we finally saw a shift back heavily in Pacheco's favor. I think this 55.5 number, way too low on Isaiah Pacheco. Kansas City has been extremely, extremely pass happy. So maybe they will continue to do that, but this is a team that over the last few years has tried to get that presence on the ground. Pacheco, 14 carries this past game after just 7 the game before, as they continue to work him back in. We also saw a big decrease in the workload for Kareem Hunt 2 weeks ago. He was at 7, tied with Pacheco, and then only 5 carries this past game. This is Pacheco's backfield again. The matchup is really good. The explosive rushes should be there. We've already seen some explosiveness from Pacheco again in the run game. I think 55.5 is way too low. I think this should be 65, maybe even upper 60s. So that's going to be another one of my favorites this week if I had to guess right now. I believe that does it from that game. Washington and New Orleans is next. Let's see. We do have some comments here. 49ers are the top of most allowing most, that is. Yeah, Aiden O'Connell lit up Kansas City. Exactly right. And then as one of the worst chalk plays of the season, Aiden O'Connell failed this past week. And actually, one of the things I like to do each week is be very straightforward about like the mistakes that I think I made. Well, one thing that we saw coming that no other site saw coming was the steam on Aiden O'Connell and single entry ownership. We ended up having him projected, I think, slightly above 10% in single entry ownership, came in at like 17%. I knew the Sims really liked Brock Bowers, but given how popular O'Connell was becoming, I think I should have said, you know what? I don't want any of O'Connell's pass catchers to do well. Yes, it's possible that Bowers could have hit with 8 for 100 yards and no touchdowns and still been a very good play, and that does next to nothing for Aiden O'Connell. But I think I should have been more on the side of not playing Bowers and leaning more into George Kittle, because as I've talked about here today, George Kittle just dominates without Christian McCaffrey, it seems, and I very much do not believe in Deebo Samuel these days. So it was very clearly a great spot for Kittle. He came through predictably, and I was sitting there with a more expensive extremely popular Brock Bowers in some lineups. Can also happily announce I'm back to single entry only. No more mistakes from me on the season. And one of the ways to do that is to cut back to single entry. At least that has worked really well for me. Which is a good segue to this question here. If you hand build 1 to 3 lineups, is the DFS package worth it? Yes, David, 100%. So first of all, one of the things that separates our product from a lot of others is we have our single entry ownership projections in addition to the MME ownership projections. Our single entry ownership and our MME ownership has proven to be by far the most accurate in the industry, and that's especially true on single entry ownership. And importantly there, like, it's not just that we're a little bit more accurate across the board, it's that we are very different in some places than the industry, and when we are the most different, we are the most right. That comes through in a big way. We also have our GPP scores, which are single entry geared. And now we have these contest sims. You can see at the top of the screen here, FTN's contest sims, new in the last few weeks. And those are immensely helpful for single entry as well. If you're like me and you love to hand build, like I don't want to rely on an optimizer to give me a bunch of lineups that I just choose from. I want to build my own lineups. For one thing, I think that's maybe the most fun thing about DFS is building lineups, seeing which combinations fit, which don't. And then you've got your lineups. You think, all right, I know I want to play this stack. I know I want to play this guy, but I don't know which 2v2 or which 3v3 to close it out with. Now you can use the optimizer and use the sims to make sure that you're making the best choice that you possibly can. So 100%, 1 to 3 lineups, the DFS package is easily worth it. And then you also get the pick'em stuff as well with our DFS subscription, which has been on fire, over a 130% ROI this season on Underdog, hitting over 60% of the individual picks. So appreciate the question. Definitely worth it. Next, Washington and New Orleans. I don't have a ton to talk about with this game because it is an ugly game. So let me run through the biggest kind of matchup thing that I think is worth noting. Washington's defense has become very aggressive over the last 5 weeks. They are playing a ton of single high, a ton of man coverage, and they are now blitzing at a top 5 rate. Now, these 3 things do point to Marquez Valdes-Scantling. However, there's no more Derek Carr. So backup quarterback, good defense, playing this aggressively. I just kind of think build for blowout. And so the things that I do have interest in, the Brian Robinson Jr. number, I think at 74.5 is a little bit low. New Orleans continues to be second worst in the league in adjusted line yards allowed, not allowing a ton of explosive runs, but a very high success rate on the ground. So I think Brian Robinson Jr. will be able to do whatever he wants on the ground. The biggest threat to him getting to this number is that it's just a blowout early and they turn to Chris Rodriguez. We saw a fantastic workload for Brian Robinson Jr. this past week. When the game was 28-0, he was still getting carries. And to that point, he had gotten all but 2 carries. The game was out of hand. Eventually, Chris Rodriguez got something like the last 13 carries of the game or something for them, ended up with a big game. So I like the Robinson number, but I'm actually going to be very interested in seeing what they end up posting for Chris Rodriguez at the time being. All you can get is touchdown. I think we'll eventually get rushing yards for him, and I will like the over as long as it's nothing crazy. Honestly, I don't have anything for the Washington passing game just because I don't expect them to be passing for much of the game. So even if you have like a strong read, the sample size there in the passing game is just going to be so low if it goes according to plan that it's not going to be that high probability of a play regardless. Similar game script potentially in the Baltimore and New York Giants game, but there are some things we can take advantage here. So let's go back to StatsHub here, and let's take a look at, number 1, the explosive rushing category over the last 5 games. Now, the Giants have been better. This is explosive run percentage, but one of the reasons why they allow a lot of explosive runs is because they allow a ton of runs because they are always losing. So they have allowed the 6th most explosive rushing yards over the last 5 weeks. That is only in 4 games, so that's noteworthy. Also, when you go to the entire season and you look at explosive rushing yards allowed, you see one team way ahead of all the others, and that is the New York Football Giants. So this is a really good spot for Derrick Henry explosive runs. Longest rush for Derrick Henry is at 20.5. He has been over 20 in all but 2 games this season. Actually, he's been at 20 or more in all but 2 games this season. Has one game where his longest rush was 20 yards. This is a really, really high probability play. Longest rush, Derrick Henry over 20.5. The other thing I like from this game, the Giants continue to play a lot of single high. Certainly expect them to load up against Derrick Henry with more single high. And I think Zay Flowers has some really good splits against single high. So you can go there. The problem there is just like we just talked about with Washington. I just don't know how much play volume there will actually be or how much pass volume there will actually be. So one of the things I like in theory here is instead of going with the over 58.5 receiving yards for Zay Flowers, you can go to that over 30.5 first half receiving yards while they're going to throw the ball and then go from there. I see Navarre mentioning Baltimore defense and Derrick Henry, one of the favorite starting points this week. Yeah, this is one where can I see Derrick Henry sitting the entire fourth quarter? Yes. But I could also see them saying, you know what, he's in this fantastic rushing title competition between he and Saquon Barkley, one of the more exciting and more dominant rushing title races we have seen in years. And if they want to let him just go and go after a 250-yard game or a 300-yard game, this is the type of matchup where it could actually happen. And we could see him break off a lot of long ones, which also means even if he's only playing 3 quarters, the upside is huge because he could have multiple 50-plus yard touchdowns in this matchup. So very much appreciate the Derrick Henry play. Let's also take a look while we're here. What is the Derrick Henry longest rush ladder like? If we're getting anything like we've gotten on some, okay, so they're a little bit defensive here on these 3.5x for 40 plus, 6.4x for 50 plus. Most of the time, a 40 plus. Even for a guy with a line around 20.5, like Jahmyr Gibbs, this would usually be 6x. This would be 13x or something like that. So I don't love the ladder. I love the 20.5 for Derrick Henry. Maybe go to the 29.5. I don't have too much of an issue there, but I think the 20.5 is just so solid that we might as well just stick with it and use the high probability play when we have it. All right, let's see. Next game is Cincinnati and Tennessee, and this is kind of where I left off in my own research. So look at us, 27.5 minutes in. We've already covered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games. That is record pace for us here on the Main Slate Matchup show. We're going to slow down a little bit. And yeah, Navarre, they've gotten hip to our longest ladders. They have. It's still been real nice. We haven't gotten to this one, but we 100% will talk about A.J. Brown, talk about Jalen Hurts, because Pittsburgh has been one of the more extreme teams in terms of their tendencies over the last 5 weeks. So we will absolutely be talking about them. But let's talk Cincinnati and Tennessee first. I'll say this about this game. A lot of what stands out as okay, this is the way you usually attack this team. There's not really anything there. So, for example, Cincinnati, one of the absolute best matchups for tight ends. In fact, they continue to be the absolute best matchup for opposing tight ends, plus 37%, which is a huge number. But Chigo Okonkwo, not super involved in the offense. Wiley, not super involved in the offense. So, in fact, let's see. Chigo Okonkwo, 4 targets this week, 6 the week prior, 1, 4, 1, 4, 5, 4. There's just not really enough there. And part of that is because we are seeing a bit of a rotation at the tight end position. We're also seeing, let's see, Wiley had 2 targets for 31 yards this week, 3 targets the week prior, 0, 1, and 1 weeks before that. So there's just not a lot to like at the tight end position for Tennessee. We also know Will Levis hasn't exactly been good. So this is it's one of those games where no matter what bet you're making, you're kind of just betting on talent here and not necessarily asking the matchup to be the driving force. You can also see here if we sort and just go to Tennessee, we've got negatives across the board because teams don't really have to throw against them, but we know that Cincinnati probably is going to just throw the ball quite a bit because that's what they do. So I have no issue with anyone on this Cincinnati team. Maybe you just feel like, hey, it was a Jamar Chase game this past week. Maybe it goes back to T. Higgins. $6,800 for T. Higgins, $8,400. Big time price for Jamar Chase. Chase Brown all the way up to $7,200 himself. Like they're all fine. There's nothing in this matchup that really stands out. So why don't we just move to the next one? New England and Arizona. Also a pretty good one. Let me make sure I didn't skip any games. It's in different order on DraftKings. Okay, there is one more game that we should touch on. New York Jets and the Jacksonville Jaguars. So let's bring this one up, and we'll start with the Jets. Nothing special here, but we did just see Miami have a lot of success against them. More on that in a moment. And then Jacksonville continues to just be good across the board. However, these numbers have really come down, especially wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3 production. Even the quarterback production has come down against them. Running back production kind of on the way up. So maybe keep that in mind for this matchup with the Jets. But it's also a team in the Jets. They're just throwing the ball, especially if Breece Hall misses. But Davante Adams, Garrett Wilson, both in good spots here. We know Jacksonville continues to play a ton of man coverage. So why don't we start there? Let's look at how these Jets receivers have fared against man coverage this season. So let's go to the Jets. And we'll see 1.8 yards per run for each of these guys so far this year as we add in that man coverage filter. We are going to go all the way up to 2.1 and 1.9. Not really all the way up. Maybe a slight lean for Garrett Wilson. We also have Davante Adams listed as the wide receiver 1. So if you remember, it is wide receiver 2s who have outproduced wide receiver 1s so far against Jacksonville this season. So potentially a reason to be very high on Garrett Wilson this week. Let's see what those lines look like over on Underdog. 61.5 receiving yards for Garrett Wilson, 66.5 for Davante Adams. I think that I will be on that 61.5 for Garrett Wilson. That seems really, really low for him, especially after he and Rodgers seem to get back on the right page, on the same page, I should say, this past week. Okay, let's look at the last 5 weeks. And let's go to passing, air yards defense, and let's look at those explosive pass yards. Okay, this is not what I was. Where am I trying to find? What am I trying to find here? Maybe it was just Miami. Maybe I was just confused, and it was Miami who has given up the most passing yards in the last 5 weeks, and not the New York Jets. But this New York Jets team, there it is, yards per attempt. So they are now 5th worst in yards per attempt allowed over the last 5 weeks. Part of that is who they have played, like this Miami passing game. But it's also just they've been a little bit more susceptible of late to passing attacks. Does that matter against Jacksonville? No, probably not at all. So almost not even worth bringing up. However, we have seen Brian Thomas Jr. put up back-to-back double-digit target games, back-to-back games over 75 receiving yards. I'm not going to say there's a good connection between he and Mac Jones. It's just that Brian Thomas Jr. is really good. So when he's on the field, whoever is his quarterback should be targeting him a lot. So maybe Brian Thomas Jr. has a big game. If Sauce Gardner misses again, then I'd maybe have some interest. Other than that, probably not. Next game. Now we can get to Arizona and New England. So let's go ahead and let's just do kind of the full spiel here. So last 5 weeks, let's look at the explosive passing. First, we'll see if either of these teams stand out in this regard. So again, we're looking for Arizona or New England. Arizona does not allow big plays in the passing game. They have been this way all season. Arizona way down here. Now, they do give up a decent success rate against the pass. So let's go to advanced and just double check that has still been the case over the last 5 weeks. Okay, so 14th, nothing crazy. But you can, even in the last 5 weeks, you can see they prioritize not allowing the big play. They're okay with a lot of intermediate passes, shorter passes. They're not going to give up the big play. Against New England, that doesn't matter a ton anyway. But next, we can go to rushing over the same time and kind of take a look at how both of these teams have done in that regard. Once again, neither team allowing a ton of explosive plays here, so not much to look at. Then we go to coverages, and we're going to look at single high rate. We're going to look at zone rate, man rate, two high rate, all that good stuff, and see once again, are these teams up here? So first, extreme, we have New England playing a ton of single high coverage, 70.5% in their last 4 games over the last 5 weeks. That is a big number. Arizona not there. Let's see if Arizona is here. Arizona number 1 in two high rate. So we want New England receivers who excel against two high and Arizona receivers who excel against single high. That's good to know. How about man and zone rates? We have New England playing the 9th most. I actually kind of expected them to be playing even more than that. And then Arizona 2nd in zone rate. So that's a good place to start. Let's do exactly that. We want the whole year for this. So I'm going to share the full season worth here. And we already have the man filter up. So I don't want man. Let's start with zone. I don't want the Jets. We said Arizona's playing a ton of zone. So I want to know which New England receivers are doing well against zone coverage. Let's uncheck that qualified box just because we have a lot of guys here. Austin Hooper, Hunter Henry, the tight ends. No surprise there. We hit on Austin Hooper. Who were they playing that week? I can't remember, but we hit Austin Hooper in part because of a matchup against a zone and two high heavy team. So maybe we go back to that this week, but we'll just keep that in our memory banks. Now let's go to two high and do the exact same thing. I think we're probably going to see a similar story. Hunter Henry, Austin Hooper. So both of those guys very much worth our attention this week. Let's head over to Underdog really quick, and let's check what we have early on for those guys. Arizona also good enough team that they probably should be able to put New England in some obvious passing situations. Just a 44.5 receiving yards total for Hunter Henry. I won't be surprised if we don't even have anything. 20.5 for Austin Hooper. That's the exact number we hit on him with last time. Let's see. Has he continued to produce at that level? So 4 for 42 last game. It was Miami. 4 for 59 the week prior. The Rams, 4 for 35. So 4 consecutive weeks with 4 targets. 4 consecutive weeks with 3+ receptions. 4 consecutive weeks over this number, and now another really good two high matchup, over 20.5 receiving yards and over 2.5 receptions at 1.12x. Look very strong for Austin Hooper. I think probably going to like that Hunter Henry number as well. But let's see. Henry, 75, 44, 63 receiving yards in the last 3 weeks, 56 and 45, 92, 41, going back before that before a 14-yard performance against the Chicago Bears in that 19-3, one of the ugliest games we've seen in a long time. So both of these tight ends definitely standing out as good plays in Underdog. We'll have some interest in either of them over on DraftKings. If you need like an extreme punt to save a ton of money, might even be worth Austin Hooper on DraftKings. I got to imagine he's $3,000 or less. I haven't honestly checked, but that Hunter Henry number looks pretty darn good. Now let's check Arizona. Arizona against single high. Boom, and now let's get rid of New England, and let's throw Arizona in there. Let's see what we get. Yards per route run. That's not Arizona. What are you doing? There we go. Yards per route run against single high, 2.5 for Trey McBride, down to 1.8 for Marvin Harrison Jr. That is not what we usually see from tight ends and wide receivers, but Trey McBride is not your average tight end. So if we get rid of single high, let's see what those numbers become. 2.4, 1.8. So kind of just a no change situation for these Arizona Cardinals against this much single high. I think a bigger point, though, is New England has come down to plus 14% for opposing wide receiver ones. Definite chance that Christian Gonzalez will be shadowing Marvin Harrison Jr. That would be a big negative for Marvin Harrison Jr. We see wide receiver twos at this massive plus 40% against New England. So maybe it's a Michael Wilson week. In fact, let's check 1.3 yards per route run overall for Michael Wilson. And let's check against single high once again. Let's see, does he go up from 1.3? He goes to 1.5. That's better than 1.3. Certainly not worse than 1.3. And you get that fantastic plus 40 matchup for opposing wide receiver twos against New England. So interest in Michael Wilson, interest in Trey McBride. Once again, let's check these Cardinals over on Underdog and see what these lines are like. Michael Wilson, 31.5. Trey McBride. Where are you, Trey? 66.5. That's a bigger number. I know Michael Wilson had a decent game because he had a big touchdown in the opening drive. 57, 55, and 54 receiving yards in Michael Wilson's last 3 games. 3, 7, and 4 targets. In those games, 4 targets for just 24 yards the game prior. So he's had a decent role, and this matchup's really good. And that's a pretty low number on Michael Wilson. So I'll also have interest there on the over 31.5. You guys can kind of see we're kind of racking up the picks so far. Lots of stuff that we like quite a bit. Navarre saying Marvin Harrison Jr. is cheap this week and could be chalky. He's an interesting one because all season long he has come in lower owned than you might expect a wide receiver one to come in the matchups that he has had. The production obviously hasn't always been there this season. So I don't see him being chalky, but maybe he won't be quite as contrarian as he's been, although that might come down to how much people expect shadow coverage from Christian Gonzalez in this one. If they expect it, he won't be chalky. If they don't really think of it, then maybe he would be. But I think this Michael Wilson prop is probably the best way to play this matchup anyway. All right, next game. That does it for the 1 o'clock games. In fact, that was the first 425 game. Indianapolis and Denver is next. Let's see. We've got 15 minutes left. Why don't we skip Indianapolis and Denver? Because I really want to talk about Buffalo, Detroit, and I really want to talk about Pittsburgh and Philly. There's also Tampa Bay and the Chargers. I don't feel the need to talk a ton about Tampa and LAC just yet because that game has 2 very important injury situations. First being Ladd McConkey, who just missed, was limited in practice today with that knee and shoulder issue. So we don't know yet if he'll be playing. We don't know yet if Bucky Irving will be playing. So until we get some more clarity, not a whole lot to say about that game. So let's do Buffalo, Detroit, and Pittsburgh and Philly, and then call it a day. I will say, like, there are some aspects of this Denver and Indianapolis matchup where we shouldn't just gloss over it, but if we don't get to it here in the last 15 minutes on stream, then I will just make sure to cover it in Discord for all our FTN Fantasy subscribers. So let's talk Buffalo and Detroit. And I'm going to start in a bit of a different place than usual here. I'm going to start by looking at blitz rates. So let me get rid of Arizona. Let me get rid of all of these filters, in fact, and just look at season-long blitz rate by defenses. Now, Detroit, those numbers are right. Let me refresh. I don't think a team has a 115% blitz rate this season. Pressure, passing, pressure, defense, and sort by blitz rate. And you'll see Detroit blitzes at the 10th most on the season at 31%. However, let's remember, several weeks ago, Aiden Hutchinson goes down. Now they have to get pressure without a very healthy defensive line. That defensive line has gotten more and more injured in the last couple weeks. Remember that Thanksgiving game against Chicago where it's like every other play, oh my God, I didn't even know they had this many defensive front players, and they just keep leaving the field injured. So what has Detroit done in response? Well, let's bring up the last 5 weeks, and let's do the same thing: passing, pressure, defense, and sort by blitz rate. And Detroit now a monstrous 44.7% blitz rate. If it wasn't for the fact that Todd Bowles is going Flores level of blitz is from last year, Brian Flores levels of blitzing from last season, this Detroit number, 44.7%, would look even higher than it already is. So Detroit's going to blitz. We know they're going to blitz. They feel like they have to do it to create pressure, and they don't have a good enough secondary to hold up without pressure. as we have kind of seen all season. Remember the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data showing Detroit gives up a lot of production to wide receivers. So when you have a secondary that's allowing this, granted, this is largely because of how much teams have to pass against them because they build such quick leads. But it also shows that they're allowing a lot of production and they don't have the best secondary. So we know that they're going to blitz Josh Allen. Blitzing Josh Allen is a dangerous task. So let's go and now look at that. Let's look, number one, at how Josh Allen has fared against the blitz. And then let's look at who produces for this Buffalo team against the blitz. I kind of have an inclination of who I expect it to be. However, it looks like Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid will be back this week. So a little bit of a busier receiving core. I know Amari Cooper had 14 targets this past game. It's going to have a tougher time doing that with Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid back in the mix. But we can still see what's up here, because if Buffalo and Los Angeles can explode the way it just did, we know Buffalo and Detroit can also explode and be the game that you need to be on. So I don't expect Josh Allen to become that popular this week, because who do you stack it with? That's a really difficult question to answer. And that kind of difficulty answering that question keeps quarterback ownership down. And then the same can actually be said about Detroit, right? It could be Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jameson Williams. It could be Jahmyr Gibbs or another David Montgomery game. Point being, it's spread out enough that nobody in this game is going to be crazy high owned, and yet we know it is the premier game environment. So we've got to address this one. We've got to figure out who might stand out here. So advanced filtering, passing, verse blitz to true, and let's look at what we've got this season. So where I'm going to go is player, and now we're going to use our DVOA and DYAR data. The reason I like using this data here is because it tells us everything we need to know. This is the most predictive data. It strips away a lot of the variance in football. It rewards quarterbacks for, a 7-yard completion on 3rd and 6 is worth more than a 10-yard completion on 3rd and 17. You're not going to get that in yards per attempt. You're going to get that here in DYAR and in DVOA, things of that nature. It's also more predictive than EPA because it's stripping away some of that variance, right? EPA is all about how you did on 3rd down, whether you scored touchdowns, whether you didn't throw picks, things of that nature. DYAR and DVOA do reward the more important production, but they also do so in a way that it maximizes predictive value and doesn't become so susceptible to the small sample variance in football. So against the blitz, Josh Allen, 10th in DYAR, good DVOA, not a fantastic DVOA, 9th. So very good, but he's also fantastic. So we should expect that. Let's check. Remember, we still have that blitz filter up here. I want to check scramble yards. I didn't need to hit the advanced filter, but that works. Rushing, run concept, scramble, true. And let's just see here. Scramble, true. Yep. So is that doing both of those things? Yeah, we still have 2 filters on. So this is scrambles against the blitz, 328 rushing yard. Is that right? Let's double check that. I might be asking too much here. Nope, it's still on there. Look at that. Okay. So whoops, where'd it go? There is a chance that this is just scramble yards, and that it can't do the filtering through both things. Easy way to test that is I'm hitting way too many things at once. Slow down, Alex. All right. 328 rushing yards for Josh Allen on scrambles. If we get rid of that first passing filter, what is going to happen to the Josh Allen scramble yards? Okay, look at that. How damn good is StatsHub? Shout out to the tech team, to the developers, and to the data team, the charting team as well here. That is awesome that we can look at scramble yards on blitzes. And because of that, I also now can say, sure enough, Josh Allen loves to scramble against the blitz. So here we have it. 328 rushing yards, 9.1 yards per carry, and 3 touchdowns on his scrambles against the blitz. That is really, really good production from Josh Allen against the blitz. So doing well in the passing game, doing well in the running game. Let's get rid of that scramble filter. And now let's look at which Buffalo wide receivers have stepped up against the blitz and are really producing. So team Buffalo, yards per route run. Hello, Amari Cooper, 4.3 yards per route run on just 29 routes, 8 of 11 for 126 and a touchdown against the blitz. I was actually expecting Khalil Shakir to be the guy here. Sure enough, 2.6 yards per route run. Let's get rid of that qualified box to see where Keon Coleman comes in. 2.5. So it's been the main guys. It has been the main guys, and everybody else really kind of falls back. Like look at Dalton Kincaid, 0.6. Matt Collins, 0.7. Samuel's not going to be on the field much. Dawson Knox probably won't be on the field as much. All of these guys, Amari Cooper especially, that is so interesting. Khalil Shakir, 2.6. Keon Coleman again, 2.5. So Buffalo stack has a massive amount of upside this week. Let's check those prices on those Buffalo guys. Shakir, 61, but Amari Cooper, $5,300. Keon Coleman, 48. Goodness gracious. All three of these guys very much in play this week. I might lean to Amari and Keon Coleman. The downside there is I think those guys are probably competing for the same targets more than everybody else. That Amari Cooper yards per route run against the blitz number is so phenomenal. We know what a great route runner he is, so that makes sense. When you need someone to get open quickly because you know the blitz is coming, why look at anyone else than Amari Cooper? So I love that. And then Shakir probably getting a lot as well, because if you expect a blitz, you dial up something quick, just get the ball in his hands, like on a screen or a quick drag route, just trying to get blockers ahead of him, let him run after the catch. So I think both of those guys really do make a lot of sense. And if Josh Allen is going to have the type of week he had last week, it could be awesome. For saying, yeah, game of the season. I would argue Buffalo, Los Angeles was maybe the game of the season last week. We've had some really good ones, actually. Baltimore, Cincinnati ×2 was phenomenal, but Buffalo, Detroit could be fantastic. All right. I think that does it on the Buffalo side of things. I don't expect them to run the ball a lot. That's in part because Detroit is a run pass filter, but it's also because when you're playing against this good of an opponent, you put the ball in the MVP's hands, and that is, at this point in time, seemingly Josh Allen. All right. Now let's look at Buffalo. And I think the thing that probably is going to stand out is the way that they have defended the run. So let's check that. Okay, they've been a little bit better. 257 explosive rushing yards in the last 4 games only. So they're very high on this list. You can also see that in the fact that they've allowed the 7th highest explosive rush percentage in those last 5 weeks. That's not really new to this team. They've been doing that all season long. They have not been good against the run whatsoever. Those explosive runs, you guys kind of know where this is going, don't you? It's going to Jahmyr Gibbs. It's going to Jahmyr Gibbs. So let's start on the prop side. 65.5 rushing yards is his prop. Looks like we don't have a longest rush yet for him. Let me refresh this and see if it is up, because the Jahmyr Gibbs longest rush has been basically automatic for a lot of this season. And we have hit it a ton. 16.5. You're really going to give us that? That might be my favorite one of the entire week. Jahmyr Gibbs over 16.5 longest rush. Let's read off his longest rushes of each game this season. Knowing it's a great matchup on the ground, he's got 8 in week 1. Okay, he would have missed that one. 24 hit, 18 hit, 20 hit, 15 narrow miss. 45 hit, 70 hit, 18 hit, 20, 23, 17, 28, 20. He's failed twice. He's hit this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 consecutive games. In a lot of those games, he had multiple runs over 16.5. Longest rush over 16.5 yards for Jahmyr Gibbs. We're going to have to be in a hurry to hit that before it goes up and up and up. That is phenomenal. Probably my favorite one of the week. Sometimes it's that simple. We do. We got to get in. We got to get a lot of these tonight. We've got way too many to wait and see if they start moving against us. I will do my best to get these up tonight. Probably more realistic to say it's going to be tomorrow morning, but we will see. We will definitely see. This one is as good as it gets. On the DFS side of things, Jahmyr Gibbs is definitely a viable bring back. Let's go back to DraftKings here and just take a look at pricing together. I'm on Ross St. Brown, 7,600. I've got no issues there. 75 for Gibbs is a little bit expensive. I like the fact that he hasn't had that huge ceiling game of late. We have had a couple matchups in a row where Montgomery did make some sense, but this matchup against Buffalo, I think this has to be a Gibbs game. It just has to be, man. It really does. I also like to see how much of a role he had in the passing game this past week. Let's see if we can find anything in the Buffalo coverage in the way that they have defended the pass of late. So let's see here. Receiving, advanced. And don't worry, guys. We're pretty much at an hour now, but we're going to go overtime to talk about Pittsburgh and Philly, and then we will call it a show. These games, like, we can honestly spend an hour each on both, and I think we'd still have plenty to talk about and look into. These are so fun. But all right, receiving advanced. We need to go to single high. Buffalo, not near the top. 13th in single high, so not even worth looking at too high. How about man coverage rate? Nothing there. Zone coverage rate? 8th in zone. That's not really anything. If I recall correctly, Amon-Ra St. Brown is the zone guy for this Detroit team, but nothing extreme enough to mention much. I think you can make an argument that, hey, what happens if Buffalo is actually the team that jumps out to the lead? That's when we could get the massive volume game from Amon-Ra St. Brown that we haven't had this year since week 2 when they lost to Tampa Bay, and Amon-Ra St. Brown had 11 receptions on 18 targets for 119 yards. That was 25.9 DraftKings points without any touchdowns. Maybe we see that kind of performance this week. They haven't had any other game scripts like that. Even against Green Bay, it's like they were never in a situation where they needed to throw the ball a million times. I think Goff did have a lot of dropbacks that game. He did throw the ball 41 times, but he threw the ball 55 times in that Tampa Bay game. So that's the path for Amon-Ra, and it's probably the best path for any of these Detroit guys. Before we dismiss everything else, let's just go back and make sure that Buffalo isn't suddenly allowing a lot of explosive passes that should make us look more at Jameson Williams. But no, I didn't think so. In fact, they're quite good in this regard. They don't allow a lot of explosive passes, which might be another point in Amon-Ra St. Brown's favor. So St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, no surprise there. That's usually the two we want to look at. In the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data, anything there? Buffalo, plus 19% to opposing running backs, and plus 21% to opposing wide receiver 2s. Now, St. Brown and Jameson Williams, they're not your typical wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2, right? Like the wide receiver 1 is usually the guy on the outside a lot. Well, Jameson Williams isn't, Jameson isn't on the outside less than Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's on the outside more than Amon-Ra St. Brown. So this doesn't do a whole lot for me. This is, I think, the most important number, that plus 19% for opposing running backs. So potentially that explosion game from Jahmyr Gibbs. Probably the way I want to play it, but man, that gets expensive. You go Josh Allen and Jahmyr Gibbs. Of course, that worked out this last week with Josh Allen. And neither Kyren Williams or Puka Nacua, you also could have done both of them. So the fact that it's expensive shouldn't drive us away from it. All right, it's time. Philadelphia Eagles, Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh, a lot I want to talk about here with Pittsburgh. So first, let's look at where these two teams rank in the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data. And you can see Philadelphia, bad matchup all around, except wide receiver 1s, although that's in large part because to start the season, Philly was really bad against wide receiver 1s. And then they also had a week with no Darius Slay. They've been just really good all around of late. So nothing really to attack on the Pittsburgh side. With Philly, however, minus 3%, not great against running backs, pretty neutral. Plus 9% for tight ends. No Dallas Goedert, so I don't really care about that. Minus 14% to wide receiver ones, minus 4% to wide receiver twos. Okay, so why do I have a lot of interest in Philly? Well, a couple things to note. Last 5 weeks, rushing. If you are going to slow down this Philadelphia offense, what do you need to do? Stop the run. How does Pittsburgh look in success rate against the run in the last 5 weeks? Oops, second worst. That's not a way to slow down Philly. They are second worst against the run in success rate, I should say. Like they're still doing a good job controlling explosives. Way down here, 18th most explosive runs in that time. Explosive run rate, even better, 25th highest explosive run rate allowed in those 5 weeks, but they're allowing a lot of successful runs. That's not going to work against Saquon Barkley and this Philadelphia offensive line. It's not going to work against the quarterback run game with Jalen Hurts, which has been kind of rolling of late as well. So that's a bad sign for them, but it's an especially bad sign because they're allowing that success rate in the run game, despite the fact that in this time, they are playing the most single high coverage in the league, a massive 74.7% single high rate in this time. And why does this matter so much? Because we have a squeaky wheel narrative for A.J. Brown who dominates single high coverage. And this is like the ultimate lose-lose situation. Pittsburgh can continue to play a lot of single high where they're already struggling to stop the run, and Saquon can have a big game. Even if Saquon doesn't break off the 50-yarder and the 60-yarder, he could still easily get over 100 yards. Maybe he gets some receptions and scores a couple touchdowns and breaks the slate that way. Or Pittsburgh could go all in to try to stop the run, dare this Philadelphia passing attack that hasn't been able to win games on its own of late to actually beat them. And A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts might finally have that ceiling game. I don't really have a lean as of yet to which of these two things I think is more likely to happen. I think the better answer is probably you wait and see what the field expects. On the props side of things, let's take a look at this Philadelphia offense. Devontae Smith, 46.5 yards. Seems low. Saquon, 97.5. That is a monstrous rushing total, but I think it's probably low. 17.5 for a longest rush. The thing with Saquon is, Pittsburgh has been good at preventing the explosive runs. But if you let Saquon get 7, 8, eventually that guy who makes the tackle at 8 is going to miss that tackle, and Saquon's going to go for 20 plus. So the 17.5 I think is low. I like that one. A.J. Brown, 75.5. That's probably solid, but 26.5 is the longest reception. Also probably solid. And by solid for that receiving yard, so I actually meant the line is probably a fair line. The longest reception I think is better. 28, 25, 44, 20, 29, 41, 40, 67 this season for A.J. Brown. Just 15 in the last 2 games. But this is a number he usually clears. Against this much single high, I expect him to clear it. With the squeaky wheel narrative, I expect him to clear it. So I think this is another strong one, both the 26.5 for A.J. Brown and the 17.5 longest rush for Saquon Barkley. I like that. I like that a lot. This is 100% true that the famous pointing gif came after complaining about not getting the ball enough. Now, I should say, for anyone who's tuned in to NFL Twitter, you've probably seen drama from Philly this week. A lot of that has been way overblown. A.J. Brown was asked a question, what about this offense could get better? He said passing. Today he was like, well, what do you want me to say? Rushing? Like, are running backs going to win MVP potentially? Like, that's obviously not the answer. They're all good. I think the squeaky wheel narrative is there, but it's not like there's actual drama going on in Philly. But he did have that pointing gif. It was 6 receptions, 156 yards, and 3 touchdowns against this Pittsburgh team, and they still play a similar style defense. It's still a lot of single high, daring you to win deep. And one of the reasons why Pittsburgh plays that style is because usually it works for them. Usually that doesn't really penalize them, in large part because T.J. Watt and the defensive line get pressure on the quarterback quickly. But T.J. Watt's going up against either Lane Johnson or Jordan Mailata this week. two of the absolute best tackles, if not the two best tackles in the entire league. I would love this. 3 touchdowns by halftime. Kind of saw it coming last week. It obviously didn't happen, but this matchup could be the one where it happens. Pittsburgh's a good enough defense that I am not going to make a rule like at least one of A.J. Brown or Saquon Barkley in my lineup. I think both are going to be good plays. I want to see the ownership for both. I think, we saw Saquon at like 20% this past week. I think we could see him 7-8%, in which case I'll just be on Saquon. But yeah, this is potentially really, really good. There's one other thing I wanted to look at in the running game. So let's do that. Let's do that real quick. I want to see the types of runs that Saquon is having the most success with. Now, one of the things I know about this Eagles run game is part of the reason it has been so good is because it is really diverse. They don't rely on one scheme or two schemes. They can do it all. And I think we'll see that here with Saquon. Run type, a lot of inside zone, not a lot of outside zone. That's actually a very low amount of outside zone. It's a high amount of man duo. It's a very high amount of power. Is that the highest amount of power among qualified backs? No, but it's up there, 6th highest. So let's see, where is he in man? Not the highest, but again, like near the highest. So inside zone, man, and power. Let's see how Pittsburgh defends these, because if I'm looking at this because I think I remember Pittsburgh having like a really, really big weakness. I don't know which one it was. I feel like it was inside zone, but let's find out. So first, let's look at that success rate overall against the run, and we see Pittsburgh on the season 17th. So remember, second worst over the last 5 weeks, but 17th on the season. And let's check their yards per carry. 27th. So usually a good run defense, which is why the fact that they are second worst in success rate over those last 5 weeks is actually like a really important thing to notice. And now let's go by rush concepts. So first, I don't want outside zone. That's the one he doesn't really use. Inside zone. Success rate. Pittsburgh 10th highest. Okay. That's a bit of a weakness in comparison. Yards per carry, 8th worst. Okay. So they're much more susceptible here to inside zones. Let's see those explosive numbers. 8th most explosive rushing yards against inside zone. So in that regard, good matchup. Let's look at man duo. And then we will look. Actually, you know what? Let's look at outside zone, because I do want to look at it just in case, like if Pittsburgh is dominant against outside zones and Saquon's not going to do that anyway, that's another reason to like the matchup here on the ground. So let's see, where are you, Pittsburgh? 23rd in explosives. Success rate, 21st. And here, remember, that's good. We're looking for them to be in the top 10 for the offensive matchup in that regard to be good. Pittsburgh down 29th. So much stronger run defense against the outside zone, which this Philly offense doesn't really use. How about against man duo? And part of this too is like, I expect some of the field to go all in on the squeaky wheel narrative for A.J. Brown. So if we can actually get different by going to Saquon, who Philly wants to go to week in and week out anyway, I also think there's a fairly decent chance that, especially if there's no George Pickens, this Pittsburgh offense just might not have it against this elite Philadelphia defense. And we could see a very positive game script in a competitive enough, in what should be a competitive enough game like coming in, that they might still be slow to pull Saquon late if they are pulling away, and let him run wild in the second half with a comfortable lead. So let's see. Now we are on, did I already change this? Man duo, yes, I did. Okay. So now let's look at the explosives here. 6th most explosive rushing yards, 14% explosive run rate allowed. 5.9 yards per carry allowed, worst in the league against man duo. This is a Saquon week, man. It's just going to be Saquon again. And now let's go to power. Good luck, Pittsburgh Steelers. Saquon's going nuts again. Okay, they're better here against power. 31st. Only Philadelphia has allowed fewer explosive. Actually, no, they're tied. 0 explosive rushing yards allowed against power this season for them both. Let's check that success rate. Good against power. And let's check that yards per carry number. Good there as well. Really good. So probably don't see a ton of outside zone, probably don't see a ton of power, but this is why this Philadelphia run game is so damn good, because no matter what the defense does, they have an answer for it. Pittsburgh not as good against inside zone, very much not good against man duo. I think we'll see a lot of both for Saquon Barkley and a big rushing week for Saquon Barkley. Didn't mention the night games, did not mention that Los Angeles game, did not mention the Indy and Denver game. I will discuss those a little bit in chat. I'll answer any questions that people have in chat on any of those games. And I'll probably include a lot of that in my articles too, if there's anything worth touching on. Can, by the way, announce a bit of a change in the article structure this week here at FTN Fantasy. New article from me. I will not be writing 10 under 10% this week. Two Gun will be writing 10 under 10%. He's taking over 10 under 10%. Perfect match for his play style. Two Guns, 10 under 10%. Can't wait to read that this week. And I will be adding a single entry specific article for you guys as well. I'll be talking about the stacks that I'm considering. I'll be talking about the core plays that I like, whether those are chalky guys or contrarian guys. Maybe Saquon Barkley is going to be a core play. We will see. And I will also add some context, like if you are using this stack, it makes sense to then differentiate and use these players, or this is a contrarian of stack to now eat the chalk. I'll talk about what I'm seeing in our contest sims. Really, really exciting stuff. I think you guys are going to love this new article, and you will definitely love Two Guns version of 10 under 10%. Let's see. I don't think I would want this with no Pitt run back. I also think if you're going to Jalen Hurts this week, you probably just want to say it's the A.J. Brown domination game, and he's probably better single stacked. But I think my inclination is just, look, Pittsburgh's still a good pass defense. Like, even if you think Philly is going to try to throw the ball more this week, doesn't mean they're going to do so successfully. And it's not because their passing game is struggling. It's just because Pittsburgh has a good pass defense. The way they play defense definitely fits the skill set of both Hurts and A.J. Brown, so the upside is there. But as we just saw, it's also a game where it seems like Philly's going to be able to have success when they want on the ground. So I will probably be looking elsewhere for stacks. I also don't think there's enough value on this slate like there was last week to really comfortably go Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown. But that'll do it here on Main Slate Matchups. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow live, 5:30 Eastern for the Millie, myself and Prop God, talking through the entire slate, especially from a picks perspective. We will catch you then.